Now we're going to discuss exercise 3-7, the solution to it. Cretan Enterprises uses a predetermined overhead rate of $21.40 per direct labor hour. This predetermined rate was based on a cost formula of $171,200 of total manufacturing overhead for an estimated activity level of 8,000 direct labor hours. The company incurred actual overhead of $172,500 and used 8,250 direct labor hours. This exercise 3-7 is on page 115. Part 1 of this problem wanted us to determine the amount of under or over applied manufacturing overhead for the period. In order to solve this problem, we need to first determine how much manufacturing overhead was applied. Remember that manufacturing overhead is going to be applied based on the predetermined overhead rate in this problem of $21.40 per hour. Since overhead is applied based on direct labor hours, every time a job has a direct labor hour, it gets allocated $21.40 of overhead. For this particular company, during this particular period, there were 8,250 direct labor hours. Each of those hours received $21.40 of overhead. Therefore, the amount of manufacturing overhead applied was $176,550. So the company applied $176,550 of overhead during the year. However, the actual amount of manufacturing overhead was $172,500. So in reality, they applied $4,050 of overhead, more overhead than what they needed to. In an ideal world, if you had a crystal ball, you would have applied $172,500 of overhead, because you would have known that that was the actual amount of overhead you were going to incur. This is always going to be the issue, right? You're never going to know the exact amount of overhead that you're going to incur during a period, and you're never going to know the actual direct labor hours that you're going to incur. Therefore, you're going to always end up with this over-applied or under-applied issue. In this particular case, manufacturing overhead was over-applied by $4,050, the difference between $176,550 and $172,500. Part 2 wanted to know that assuming the entire amount of under-applied or over-applied overhead is closed out to cost of goods sold, what would be the effect of the under-applied or over-applied overhead on the company's gross margin for the period? In this particular situation, since manufacturing overhead is over-applied, cost of goods sold would decrease by $4,050 and gross margin would increase by $4,050. In effect, what happened all throughout this period, they put too much overhead into cost of goods sold. Therefore, their cost of goods sold was $4,050 higher than what it should have been. Gross margin was $4,050 lower than it should have been. By zeroing out or by fixing or closing out this over-applied overhead, we end up fixing that situation and bringing it back to where it should have been. This does it for our discussion of exercise 3-7.